time before to the Rotary folks, but I'll give you a little background. The reason I got interested in the Dixie Highway is I'm in the Bedford Hiking Club, and we take walks around different places in the county once a week or so. And several years ago, we walked that section of Dixie Highway by Cresthaven Cemetery, you know, kind of behind Apple Acres there. And since I was born in the South, I looked at this road sign, Dixie Highway, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out how a road this far north of the Mason-Dixon line earned or warranted the name Dixie. So I thought I would look into it. But as long as I'm standing up right here and wearing the t-shirt, I'll invite you all to our next hiking club walk next Monday. If you want to walk around some county and maybe see some place you haven't seen before, we meet at 5:15 on Mondays, and next Monday we're meeting at Dunham's Sporting Goods. So you're welcome to come to that if you'd like.
And where's the walk?
I don't know yet. Allison's leading somewhere. So that's how I got interested in Dixie Highway. This presentation is by no means complete or comprehensive, but I hope you find it maybe a little bit educational and perhaps somewhat amusing. We'll see. Okay, so to understand, we're going to have to go into the Wayback Machine a little bit. We're going to go all the way back to 1903, and we're going to look at what it was like to travel then. So the predominant mode of transportation was the horse and buggy. Ford Motor Company was incorporated in 1903, but the Model T wouldn't appear for 6 more years. 95% of the rural roads in America were dirt, and they were unmarked, and they were in poor shape. The only roads that had pavers on them, usually brick pavers, were found in big cities. And the reason for that was, again, the horses. So what they would leave behind in the city where there was a large concentration of horses, it was easier to get rid of that if the roads were paved as opposed to just dirt roads. There were no federal or state road systems. There were no networks of gasoline stations across the country. And the few automobiles that existed were owned by the rich and were prone to break down. And here's the one I find interesting. Most Americans in 1903 lived their entire lives within 10 miles of where they were born.
That's interesting.
Because travel was difficult. So the first transcontinental auto trip took place in 1903. And it took 63 days to go from California to the East Coast. Now, Ken Burns, who's done a lot of documentaries, did a documentary about this particular trip, and it's called Horatio's Drive, named after the person who did it, who was Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson. And I've got a slide on him on that trip at the end of the presentation. There's some interesting things that happened in that. So that's the way things were in 1903. Thank you. And then a little bit later, in 1909, the Model T came along. So now the average American could afford a car, and this mobilized the nation. And another reason they could afford a car, because Henry Ford, when he brought out the Model T, also raised the daily wage of his workers to $5 a day, which was way higher than the industry standard. It was unheard of to pay people that much. But he knew if he paid them that much, that then they would buy the car that they would spend all day building. So the roads weren't any better in 1909 than they were in 1903. They were still dirt and unmarked, and you just kind of took your chance when you came to a junction. And on any given trip, you were probably going to have a breakdown. A flat tire, those were common, broken axle, broken spring. We don't think about that nowadays. We can just hop in the car and go, you know, you're going to get where you're going to go. But back then, they pretty well had to bank on some kind of breakdown. So everybody knew that something had to be done to the roads to make car travel viable. I mean, people had the cars, but they couldn't travel very far because of the road conditions. So that brings us to Mr. Carl Fisher. He was born in Greensburg in 1874. He was a bicycle enthusiast, and at the age of 17 opened a bicycle shop with his brothers. That's after he quit school at age 12. So they became involved in bicycle and auto racing. And then he and a partner opened a factory to manufacture acetylene headlights. Now, I don't know if anybody remembers acetylene. The miners used it on their little caps that they wore. Carbide, you put water in it, makes acetylene gas, and you can light it and there's a flame. The early cars, that's what they used for headlights. You turned on the water and it dripped on the carbide and it made the acetylene, and you ran around the front and opened up the headlight lens and you lit that one, and then you ran over and opened up the other one and you lit that one. And then you ran around the back of the car and lit the one in the back. So,
How long did that last?
what's that?
How long did the light last with the headlight?
Until the carbide ran out. And I mean, and the lights weren't very bright either. It was about like strapping a flashlight to your fender. And so, but anyway, he sold that company in 1909 because he saw handwriting on the wall. All the car lights were going to electric. So, and when he did that, he made a lot of money. So in 1909, he was what, 35 years old, and he was a multimillionaire. And this was a guy that left school in the 8th grade. So he took his money and he invested in the things that he liked. Car racing. He opened the first car dealership in Indianapolis. He paid for all the bricks that went on the brickyard in the Indianapolis 500. And in 1913, he spearheaded the construction of the Lincoln Highway, which was the first transcontinental highway, went east and west, from the east coast to the west coast. He also heavily invested in real estate in the Miami Beach area. And that was what caused him to want a north-south highway, which he called the Dixie Highway. And the reason he wanted that is because he wanted people to come down to Florida to either purchase some of his property or whatever. You know, he had invested in all this real estate and he wanted people to come down and do that. So, but all of these first national roads, both the Lincoln Highway and the Dixie Highway, were privately funded. No federal money, and I'll get into that here in a little bit, the reason why that was. So, both the automobile enthusiasts and the manufacturers wanted to improve roads. The manufacturers wanted because they figured the more people drive, the sooner their car would wear out, the sooner they would buy a new one. But the individual states didn't want to fund a highway because they wouldn't, transcontinental, because they wouldn't own the whole section. They would only own a portion of it, right? And the federal government was not in the business of highways at all at that time. You have to remember that the federal government didn't actually get income tax authority, I think, until 1913. So before then, the federal government didn't have a whole lot of money to spread around. And they certainly weren't going to put it on roads. They figured that was a local problem, not a federal problem. So the automobile manufacturers banded together and funded the Lincoln Highway, going east to west. And Carl Fisher wanted the Dixie Highway to go north to south to bring potential real estate investors to Florida. And remember, he was from Indiana. So he knew that there were people in the wintertime that got tired of the long, cold, dark winters in the Midwest, and they trying to persuade him to come down to the Sunshine State. So, if you want to pass these out, Jeff, this is a map, I think it's about 1915, of the route of the Dixie Highway. And it actually shows two routes, because there were two. There was a western route and there was an eastern route. And you'll see on your map, the western route started in Chicago, because at the time, and maybe even still today, Chicago was the biggest population area in the Midwest. So started at Chicago and went down to Miami. However, when Michigan heard that there was going to be a road going down there, they wanted to be involved. So they added a loop that went basically around the entire state of Michigan and then through northern Ohio, down through Cincinnati, and connected with the main route in southern Tennessee. And then from there, it was all the same road on down. But what's interesting, I find a couple things interesting about that map. The print is a little small at the bottom, but it lists the movers and shakers in the Dixie Highway Association, and one of them you can barely make out. He was the general secretary, a fellow by the name of Frederick Hutton. So it was curious to know, I mean, I haven't figured this out yet, but if he's any relation to the Hutton that did this. The other thing that's interesting about that map is at the very bottom, there's a table that says if you go on the western route, on the eastern route, or the combined, the whole route, how many towns you pass through. Because they used existing route. Carl Fisher did not lay out a brand new road. He used the roads that were there. And the roads that were there went from town to town, and they passed through each town. It's not like an interstate that bypasses all the town. So to go from Chicago all the way down to Miami, if you look at the column that says less than 1,000 people, that means small towns. If you included all the towns, you went through 214 towns from Chicago to Miami.
That's not a lot, that's not true.
So, but if you think about it, it's about 1,400 miles. So that means every 6 or 7 miles, you were in a new town. So you would get out of one town, just start to speed up, and then slow down. Go through that town, speed up, and then slow down.
When was this when was it finished?
Say again?
When was this finished?
Well, it was basically finished about 1915, 1916. I mean, the roads were already there, the route basically, because Carl Fisher was using existing roads. But what the Dixie Highway did before they officially, quote unquote, opened the road is they went to each little town and village and said, look, we're going to have a bunch of people coming down here, back and forth, going to Florida. You need to upgrade your roads. If you have dirt roads, you need to put brick paved roads in. And how many of them actually did that, I don't know. I'm assuming some of them jumped right on the bandwagon and saw it as a tourism plus, and some of them probably said, well, we don't have the money, we can't do it. But at least he tried to get the road improved, the entire route from Chicago down to Miami. Now, you know, going through all those towns slowed them down a lot, right? But from the driver's standpoint at that time, it was probably a good idea that they went through every single town, because the cars had flat tires and broke down so often. When you break down in 1915, there's no cell phone to pick up and use. There's no AAA to call. If you know that there's a town maybe 3 or 4 miles that way you can walk to, and one 3 or 4 miles that way you can walk to get it fixed, well, then there you go. So.
That's good, thank you.
So here's the western route, connected Chicago and Miami, and it went through Danville, Illinois, Indianapolis, Bedford, Louisville, down through Kentucky, Nashville, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Atlanta, Macon and Albany and Georgia, Tallahassee, Gainesville, and then down. And then the eastern route started in Sault Ste. Marie and went through Saginaw, Detroit, Toledo, Bowling Green, Dayton, Cincinnati, Lexington, down to Knoxville, and then the rest of it is kind of similar to the other one.
My goodness. Thank you.
So this Dixie Highway, the red splash with the white letters DH, that was the official road sign for the Dixie Highway. Now, ever since I found this out, I've been watching for estate sales, barn sales, yard sales, anyway, because Lawrence County was on the official route of the Dixie Highway. And I had not seen any one of these signs appear anywhere. And I assume it's because, you know, the road was privately funded. So they didn't have a whole lot of money to throw around. I expect that most, if not all of the signs, were simply wooden signs. And so they probably didn't survive. If they had been metal or, you know, porcelain over tin or something, then maybe they would have lasted 100 years. But I suspect most of them were wooden. And when the federal highway system took over and renumbered all the highways, they probably just took those signs down, threw them in a big pile and burned them, I'm guessing, I don't know. But I personally think that since Lawrence County was a part of the Dixie Highway, maybe somebody could at least reproduce this sign and we could put one in our museum. That's just my thought.
Thank you.
We could put that on Bedford Chatter or something.
So the U.S. highway system, the federal highway system, was established in 1927. And at that time, the Dixie Highway signs came down and it was renumbered. And a lot of the western route was US 31, and a lot of the eastern route eventually became Interstate 75. Going south and north. So, where in the United States is it still called Dixie Highway?
Kentucky.
It retains its name in parts of Illinois through those towns near Chicago. But in Indiana, the only portion of the highway that officially retains the legal name Dixie Highway is right here in Bedford, just southwest.
That's great.
So there's some in Tennessee and Louisville that also use the name Dixie Highway, and there's a few places in Florida itself where they still use the name. But as far as Indiana goes, we've got the only piece of it left.
Yeah,
So it went through Bedford, did it go through Bedford?
Well, I'll get there. Hang on, I'll get there.
You just got home.
So, traveling the Dixie Highway in Lawrence County, it basically followed the route of Old State Road 37. You came in at Judah and followed 37, you went through Needmore, followed 37, you came through Olytic, you came into Bedford, you come out of Olytic, down through the Olytic bottoms, up that bridge, into Bedford, you're in town now, slowing down to 30 miles an hour. You follow Lincoln Avenue until you get to 15th Street. Turn right, go behind what was the high school, right? Turn left on O Street, cross 16th, and it turns to Washington Street. Follow Washington all the way to the end. Well, it dead ends now, but it didn't used to. It used to cross the river. Cross the river bridge there, and turn left, and you're back on the portion that we now still call Dixie Highway. Follow that down all the way to Mitchell, and then keep on going south to Orleans. So that was the path through Lawrence County. So think about it, about 2 blocks west of here was the path to Florida.
Well, that's where that station.
I lived when that happened.
Into
I figured it was going down at the gas station. Yes, I remember that was the highway, way we went to look.
That's neat.
So this is the slide I promised on Horatio's Drive, the guy who completed the Transcontinental in 1903. It was a result of a wager. $50 was the bet. Turns out Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson, he was a physician, but he was out on the West Coast and he was having a conversation with people and he was talking about how the automobile was the future of transportation. They said, no, you're never going to get rid of the horse. The horse is going to be here forever. It's going to get us where we need. So he bet him $50 that he could go cross country in a car. He had to do it in less than 90 days. Fact of the matter is he didn't own a car or know how to drive one when he made the bet. The next morning he found a used 1901 Winton and he found the guy who worked on it, the driver, the mechanic, and he hired him to ride in the car with him, and away they went. And they generally followed the railroad route because they knew they would come to some obstacles like a river or something sooner or later that they couldn't get across, but there would be a railroad bridge. And not only that, every so often, the railroads, where the railroads went, the towns went, right? And there would also be a telegraph station there. So if they needed parts, which they often did need parts, they would head for the telegraph station, telegraph the Winton manufacturing facility, which was in Ohio, I believe. They would get the part, put it on a train, and send it to him. And that's how he kept going. And it was stated that they replaced so many parts on the way that you could argue that the car they finished with was not the one they started. And this is an actual picture of him in the car. It was a 2-cylinder, 20 horsepower open car, no roof or doors or windshield. It's basically the same as crossing the country on an oversized riding lawn.
How was that? Was that going from coast to coast?
Yeah,
And then how many days did it take?
63.
What month did he do it?
I don't recall off the top of my
Must have
head.
been summer.
But in 1944, he donated it to the Smithsonian Museum, whatever it still is today. But the funny thing is they spent a lot of those days waiting on parts. If they hadn't broken down, they could have done it faster. But one of the towns that they stopped in while they were waiting on parts, there was this little dog that kept following them around. And they tried to ask, well, who does this dog belong? Nobody claimed the dog. So they put the dog with him in the car and away they went. And they said that, they ran into so many obstacles between the car breaking down, having to pull it out of mud bogs on the road and all this kind of stuff. So many troubles to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. By the time they finally got to the East Coast, the only one of the trio that wasn't using the Lord's name in vain was the dog. And this 1901 Winton had chain drive. The engine was up front, and there was a large, bigger than a bicycle chain that went to the rear tire. And they said that, well, when they started their trip, they dipped the back wheels of the car into the Pacific. And when they got to the East Coast, they dipped the front wheels into the Atlantic. But anyway, throughout the whole trip, one of the few parts that did not fail was that heavy metal chain. And after they made it to the East Coast, Dr. Jackson drove the car to his home, which was in, I think, New York State somewhere. Anyway, as he was pulling into his house, into his driveway, the chain fell. The car had enough. So that's basically what I know about the Dixie Highway and traveling in the early 1900s. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. Yes?
Do you know which Smithsonian Museum it's in, the car?
No, I do not. I did notice, though, that after I found out the route through Bedford, it reminded me that I've always noticed, like on Washington Avenue going south, if you look, every now and then there's a building that looks like it and once was a gas station. There's that one on the corner of 27th Street that was a hair salon. That was a gas station. There's one on 32nd Street. There's a big building. I'm pretty sure that was a gas station. There's another one on about 34th Street. And I think the reason there's so many gas stations along that road is because it was a highway, basically.
There used to be a gas station there next to the Baptist church, and
Right.
little corner building there.
Uh-huh.
Oh, really?
That was Bill Raridan had that gas station. That was one of the places he had bears.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me one more time, when was it completed?
So I think it was officially opened in 1916, and the Federal Highway Administration started in 1927. So the Dixie Highway really only existed about 11 or 12 years. So.
It's interesting that the name is still in Bedford, that road
Right.
sign is still there.
Right, and I mean, if your house is on that road, the legal name is, 327 or whatever, Dixie Highway, so it's a legal name for the road.
So, Mr. Fisher, he didn't put his own money in, he just went around and tried to get towns to pave, or how did that work?
I'm not sure how that worked. I know he tried to persuade the towns to put their money in, and if they didn't, I don't know if he funded some of it. That's another avenue I was going to investigate, because he came through here, the road came through here, so probably sometime between, say, 1912 and 1915, either Mr. Fisher or one of his associates probably came and gave a proposal to either the Bedford City Council and or the Lawrence County Commissioners, saying, look, we're going to put a road through here. You better fix your roads up to support them. But I haven't gone through to try and find minutes to see if that actually happened and how his message was received. They could have said, you got a nice plan, and let us know how it turns out.
Many of the roads in the streets of Bedford were brick, but the homeowners had to pay for in front of their house.
Is that right?
Uh-huh. So I'm sure Lincoln was one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Coming through town, it was already paved, right? Presumably, at least partially. But when you got out of town,
Yeah, I'd say in a lot of towns that was the case. The towns may have paved the roads
Yeah.
because, like I said, there was more horses there, so they
Yeah.
needed a way to get rid of that stuff. But I think their challenge was out in the country between the towns, because then you're asking the county commissioners to pay, and that's a longer stretch of road probably too, between towns. So I don't know how that portion of it worked. But I do know they eventually drove it, whether it was improved or not.
I have lived in Lawrence County all my long life, and I
can remember.
Older people than me talking about going out to the Dixie Highway to a bar during the 20s where they had
prohibition.
and they had dances, and it was the place to go. I think there was a skating rink.
Yeah, my mom, they lived on Dixie Highway, and she closed. Yeah.
So it has a reputation for fun, too. A lot of
It was a
things
main
went on
thoroughfare.
out in the.
Are you talking about Terry Park?
Terry Park. I thought that was its other name. I was trying to think.
Where was that? Terry Park?
It's south of Mitchell, or south of White River. Would be pretty much by the Red Cross Cemetery, but on the old highway.
Terry Park, yeah.
That was called Terry Park, and there was a dance hall, and
Right.
there used to be all sorts of
Oh, my.
partying went on out
Party,
at Terry
party,
Park.
party. And isn't that where Judge Davis lived in the Red Cross house
Pardon?
cabin? Wasn't the Red Cross cabin out there?
Pretty close to there, yes.
So I was looking at some old maps, and you know, it's interesting, right now, the split for 50 and 37 is at that junction where the Speedway station is, right?
Right.
But if you look at the older maps, where the road from Washington Avenue came over the river, and you know, if you follow Dixie Highway there, that road splits behind the Huber car lot, it splits and it goes, and it comes out where the old Swifty gas station is. That used to be the route of 50. So the 50-37 split used to be right up there by the river. And then 50 would come out by where the Swifty station was and then go on west.
Do you know when the first highway bridge was built over White River?
No, I do not. Yes.
Yeah, I used to be stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky when I was in the Army. And that road that goes from Louisville down through Fort Knox, back in the old days, that was called Dixie Highway.
Right.
And they nicknamed it Dixie Highway. There'd be a lot of GIs get killed, got killed on that road. And was that, I guess that was probably, I'm not sure if that's US 31 now. But from Louisville to Fort Knox, for years it was called Dixie Highway. And there was a lot of soldiers, I guess a lot of fatalities. But it went down past Fort Knox. I guess that's part of the original.
Right.
Yeah, we're 31W. Our son lives in that part of Jefferson County, so we're over there quite often. It's 31W, because 31 actually splits into an E and a W through most of Kentucky. They join up back in E-Town. But yeah, the exit sign off the interstate still calls it Dixie Highway.
Yeah.
Right.
31W Dixie Highway going south.
Right.
And it goes to, again, Elizabethtown, 31 comes back together to become the head on south.
But it was nicknamed Dixie Highway because there was a lot of fatalities. I guess you got, you know, there was a lot of wrecks
Right.
down towards Fort Knox and Louisville.
It's where the east and west meet, is that label?
No, I think it's down in Tennessee. But I think it's interesting that Michigan made their route go almost entirely around the state. So no matter where you were in Michigan, you had fairly close access
Yes.
to the road. And you got to remember that at this time, in the early 1900s, there was a lot of money coming into Michigan because the automobile industry was booming, right? And there was a lot of money, there was a lot of new money, people looking for ways to spend money, so Carl Fisher was hoping they would come down and spend it for them.
And they did.
Go ahead.
Well, I did, the Michigan part intrigues me. So Michigan decided they want to be a part of this Dixie Highway thing, so they went north all the way around the river.
Yeah.
And Michigan paid for it?
I don't know how Michigan did it, but they lobbied heavily to be involved with it. And so they said, well, if you want to do your part, you can join up with us. That's what they did.
I'm trying to remember a Chevrolet we had when I was a child, and there was a little thing that said Body by Fisher. Would that have been the same guy?
Actually, I think it's a relative to his. It's not the same man. There was a whole family of Fishers.
Okay.
But, yeah.
But they all got involved in roads and
Right,
cars, it
right,
sounds like.
right.
There was a bridge south of Bedford in that area. It's on the 1899 Houston map of Lawrence County.
You mean
So-
just east of the current bridge?
Yeah, be east of the current bridge, but in that area, there used to be a ferry that went across there. And sometime in the 1890s, they did build a bridge. in that area, so I'm sure the Dixie Highway,
Well, you used to be able to see pilings in the
Mhm, yeah.
river. Are they still there?
I think they're still there.
Yeah.
That's a railroad.
They are. Railroad bridge.
That may have been a railroad bridge.
I don't know if there was a railroad bridge or a car bridge, but there, I know.
But there was in that area, there was
Okay.
a bridge in the 1890s. I don't know when it was built, but
Okay.
So do you feel like you'd like to drive some of it?
Well, I've driven the local part of it, yeah.
Far enough.
It'd be kind of fun. You wonder if a lot of states have little signs that say Dixie Highway.
Well, if you want to get more information, I mean, most of this information I got off the internet, and there's a lot of sites on the internet that if you Google Dixie Highway, you can find, you know, current day routes that go that way. So, but I would just caution you, you know, the old thing we've heard that attributed to Abraham Lincoln, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
We have the Dixie Highway resident right here next to me.
Yeah.
She lives on Dixie Highway.
Well, there you
That's
go.
very important.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much.